This weekend, I had intended to give an update on the Journey of Faith pastoral planning process. And you'll see at the beginning of the week, I put links to more information on how the process is going in the bulletin. And I noted that you'll be receiving a letter soon from our 7-parish family pastoral planning team. But as this past week progressed, and I reflected over various conversations from different people over the last few months since I've been here, it became clear to me that our parishes needed something else first. Before we can move forward into the future with our journey of faith, we need to acknowledge what we've gone through in the past, including our sorrows and our hurts. Just as we see Jesus' healing power come through those that are suffering leprosy in today's readings, so do our parishes also need God's healing power. And this is unique to every single person, certainly, but also unique to experiences of our individual parishes as well. And so I'm actually giving 3 different homilies this weekend because there's specific things that I want to say to each of our different communities. And so this homily is going to be designed to speak directly to members of St. Mary's Parish, but for those from other parishes, including St. Jane Francis and St. Joseph, you'll still get much from it, but I also want you to encourage to listen to the version that I'm going to present to your parishes as well. The bulletin always has links to the homilies that I record. So, looking back, prior to 2007, St. Mary's was connected to St. Andrew's in Bloomfield. And then in 2007, became reconnected with St. Jane Francis. In 2019, that's when Pierce joined, forming the current tri-parish family. And there's been good things, certainly, with our being connected together, but also some loss from it. You know, it's difficult having to reform relationships with different communities like that. It's a loss when masses and a priest time have to be split between parishes rather than just having a priest for yourself. If we think about it, with 3 parishes now, it means that I can only allot 1/3 of my time for each of your different communities at the various events that you have. And since we tend to go when and where Mass is most convenient often, there has been an intermingling amongst our 3 parishes, which is good when we all learn to work together, but perhaps not so good when it makes every individual parish feel less of a united community. And the rotation of masses, too, have brought good and bad things as well. While it is meant originally to bring a level of fairness among our parishes, it also means that every 4th month, communities that gather at Mass look just a little bit different. And so I know that many people have the experience of missing others that you perhaps used to see, and also find it difficult to reach out to those that are around you that you don't yet know. And in the midst of this, as you're trying to wrap yourselves around that new situation, COVID happened. So much fear and uncertainty at that time. And at the moment when you needed God the most, when you needed the consolation of Jesus in the sacraments, he was less available to you. We practiced social distancing during that time, but it became not just physical, but also a kind of spiritual isolation. The disruption of the normal way of doing things, not knowing what might happen in the future, legitimate concerns, perhaps going into even irrational fears, kind of heaviness, discouragement, confusion, questioning the future, maybe even questioning God's presence. When I was in my former parishes during that time, I realized that danger so much, and I tried to help people to notice and resist the thoughts of desolation during that time. Tried to help teach them how to use St. Ignatius' discernment of spirits, which is to try to understand where our thoughts and emotions are coming from, whether they're those things that come from God that we should accept or things that are temptations or lies from the enemy that we should reject. But unfortunately, I know that there are many individuals all over for whom this time really cut them off from the community and even from God, and who might, some even now, be trying to get by with life without having that connection to God and His sacraments. And to add to all these things, political turmoil, constant cultural attacks on Christian values, nastiness that we see in social media at times, economic burdens, and thoughts of conflict abroad. Not to mention whatever unique sorrows and burdens that you might have in your own lives. And as I've been here the last 3 months, it's also been brought to my attention that there is a deeper wound within our parish and community here in Osmond, one from the past that perhaps when the time was needed, it wasn't addressed in a way that it should have to try to bring healing from it. That there was great injury that occurred within the church from clergy abuse of minors in the past. And it brings me great sorrow to know that here at St. Mary's, we weren't spared of this. In particular, in the 80s and early 90s. We have brothers and sisters in our community who are deeply wounded, both in body and soul, whether themselves personally or those that know family members that were hurt. And to add to the pain of that abuse itself was that it was kept hidden and perhaps even maybe denied by some within the community or archdiocese. Because I know probably for many it was hard to imagine that something like that could possibly happen, especially when we see only the good that a priest might do when the evil is hidden. There was failure of leadership in the diocesan level to stop abuse when it became known, transferring of priests to new parishes, failing to restrict their ministry and access, failing to listen to victims, or to tell families not to report things. Abusers sometimes honored rather than removed. And it wasn't really until November of 2018 when the Nebraska Attorney General requested records from the Nebraska dioceses when these crimes finally began to come to light. And at that time, the Archdiocese published a list of 41 clergy with substantiated allegations of misconduct and abuse. And when the Attorney General report then came out last year, almost a year now ago, it gave the numbers of the victims and the descriptions of what had been committed. Across the 3 dioceses, 57 officials and employees of the church had committed such crimes. 258 victims had come forward, 158 in our diocese. More than 90 of those that were abused were by 2 priests, one in Omaha and one in Lincoln. And more than half of the victims were from the 60s, 70s, 80s, into the 90s. And when I last year read through the ugly descriptions of what had occurred, my heart ached with sorrow for our brothers and sisters, so many innocent and young that were betrayed, and souls that were scarred for years to come. And reading what had occurred so close to home by men who had served in various degrees in many of our parishes across the diocese, including here and my own home parish where I grew up, it made very clear the degree of the woundedness that's hidden within the church. Many, still today, are completely justified in anger against the church, against her leaders and priests. And I felt it myself as well from those things. And for some, this anger and pain has led them to separate themselves from our Lord. It should be a great sorrow that the sins of a few have separated God's children from Him and His sacraments. And so with great sorrow, we know we can't change that past as part of our lives here in the church. As much as we wish that none of our little ones would ever have been hurt. But we must ask, what we can do to facilitate healing today? That's what our readings are about, healing. Because it's not enough just for the church to say, I'm sorry. But Christian charity goes beyond that. We must make reparation for sin. And the Catholic understanding of reparation is far different from the way it's spoken about in politics, because we know that money alone doesn't bring healing, because these wounds mar the very souls of those that were injured. These are wounds within the members of God's family that only He can heal. Only our divine physician, Jesus, can repair. And Jesus came to repair that relationship between God and man. It's the whole reason that He came. And He's invited us to take part in that repairing. He wants us to help Him to fix what sin has broken. And that's especially part of the devotion to the Sacred Heart, which we have been doing here on First Fridays. Part of that is to make acts of reparation for sin. For any sin that we might hear about, we can do some kind of good act or prayer to help make up for the evil that was done. To place the injured heart of our victimized brothers and sisters into the loving heart of Jesus. Because it's Jesus who will heal and fix what sin has done. But He lets us to help Him to do that by small acts and prayers of reparation. We can do acts of reparation for our own sins, yes, but in this case, for the sins of others. Of course, we might ask, well, why should I do that? Why should I do acts of reparation when I didn't commit those sins? Perhaps they were even considered against those whom we love. It's true, I myself, for a number of those offenses, I wasn't even born yet, or was yet a small child. But as a priest, and as a Catholic, and as a member of the body of Christ who has been so wounded, I want to do my part in the healing. And so I plan to offer a Mass of reparation to the Sacred Heart of Jesus in atonement for the sins of clergy on October 21st. It's a Friday, 7 p.m. here at St. Mary's. And that's going to coincide with a day of prayer and fasting and atonement that I'll do as your priest. And you're, of course, welcome to participate and join me for that. This great wound in the church has contributed to the decline in participation and priestly vocations that now necessitate us in this round of pastoral planning I started talking about at the beginning. Before we can fully process all these losses and pains from the past, here we're faced with something new. That your parish must again divide the ministry of 2 priests among 7 parishes, spanning 70 miles from Plainview to Ponca. And I know that there's probably many uncertainties in our mind as to what will happen until the decisions are made public and final. Where will the priests live? What will the future be for our school? What will Mass schedule be like? If you happen to have looked at the parameters from the Journey of Faith that we've been placed on their website, you know the limits of how many Masses each priest can do. And it'll mean that in our 7 parish family and really in every parish family in the rural area, there will be some churches that will likely cease to have a Sunday Mass. And this too is a great loss for all of us. It's important to acknowledge the sorrowing and the suffering that is present in our hearts. I just don't talk about this just to make us feel down, but because I know the hurt is already there, and we need to talk about it. We need to process the pain of grief. It's okay to feel anger. It's okay to feel hurt. Okay to feel frustration, whether it's towards your priests, previous pastors, the bishop. And in truth, all of our pastoral planning, it's really no one person's fault. And it's better to talk about what's going on inside than just to keep it in. It's okay to feel guilt, things that we should have done in the past that may have made a difference for the way things are now. It's okay to have fear, to be anxious about the future and not knowing what it'll hold. I share that with you. I have fear about being able to serve an expanse of 7 parishes. It's okay to be sad. I share that too. I wish that I could allot all my time to just one parish, but I can't. My priesthood will ever be divided, trying to serve multiple communities at once. And so that too I have to grieve. Anger and guilt and fear, anxiety, sadness, these are all natural expressions of mourning. But I don't want to just leave you with grief and sadness and pain, even though these are things that we feel. We have faith in God, do we not? If he can cleanse the leper, he can certainly bring good out of any of our sorrows and heal our wounds. Even in the book of Lamentations in the Old Testament, which was written in mourning over the destruction of Jerusalem and their temple, we see expressions of hope. This I will call to mind, therefore I will hope. The Lord's acts of mercy are not exhausted. His compassion is not spent. They are renewed each morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, I tell myself. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who trust in him, to the one that seeks him. So there is hope and joy for us in the future of our new parish family will soon be forming. God's mercies toward us are not spent. And here at Mass, I invite you to take all of those things that are within your heart and place them here upon his altar, to unite yourself with Jesus and to let him carry you. I want to conclude by drawing from a passage from the book Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. And it's part of his Chronicles of Narnia series, in case some of you may have read that. But even if you're not familiar with his stories, he uses allegory to try to teach children something about God. And in that series, his main character is a lion, Aslan, who represents Jesus. And so in this particular book, we have a boy named Diggory who has been drawn into the land of Narnia, where he wishes to meet Aslan, because he hopes that Aslan will heal his mother, who is sick and dying. And when Diggory finally meets Aslan, it becomes clear that Aslan may not take the pain away in the way Diggory had hoped. And so as I read this passage to conclude, I want you to see yourself in Diggory, to bring your sorrows before God, and to see in Aslan's response that of Jesus to you. Please, can't you give me something that will cure my mother? Up till then, Diggory had been looking at the lion's great front feet and huge claws on them. Now, in his despair, he looked up at its face. What he saw surprised him as much as anything in his whole life, for the tawny face was bent down near his own, and wonder of wonders, great shining tears stood in the lion's eyes. They were such big, bright tears compared with Diggory's own that for a moment he felt as if the lion must really be sorrier about his mother than he was himself. My son, said Aslan. I know. Grief, pain is great. Only you and I in this land know that yet. Let us